Okay, so today I want to go over Centurion and how well positioned or not it is in the current format. So the current format, for anyone who's been living under a rock, is defined by Mulcharmy Fuelos and to a substantially lesser degree Mulcharmy Perulia. I say substantially lesser just because Fuelos is in most people's main decks if you can afford it. Some people are playing decks where they think that it's not worth putting it in the main, but then they are siding it, if they can afford it. So the tier lists that you're looking at, there are a bunch of YouTubers putting up tier lists right now, are always taking into consideration what is the line under Fuelos, or Perulia, or Shifter. Droll is not as popular as those cards right now, or at least not as the Mulcharmies, but it still is worth consideration. And this deck is more well positioned against all four of those cards, so Fuelos, Perulia, Droll, and Shifter, than almost any other meta-relevant deck I can think of. Obviously, you don't want to play under Shifter, but you can, and some decks in the past, Centurion decks, have even mained the Shifter just because it hurts your opponent more than it hurts you. And the Auxilla can, of course, bring back not only from Grave, but from Banish, so there are lines around the Shifter. So, this deck doesn't have to summon much from the extra deck. If you get Full Lost, you can basically give them just one draw, so it's not even plus, they're just replacing the Full Lost they lost, by just making Auxilla and nothing else. In some cases, they can hold the Full Loss, which I think is what most people will do, unless you are on, like, they know you're on Talents or maybe Thrust. So I think the Talents and Thrust are cards that, or Thrust at least is a card that will become a lot better this format, because a lot of people will be shotgunning the Full Loss, or the Perulia, or the Shifter. So, and then Droll, I guess, also kind of like counts in a sense where like Thrust doesn't have to add to hand, it can set. So if you have a broken Floodgate like D-Barrier, then you can Thrust the D-Barrier and you may be able to turn skip your opponent. Like, if you're 10 by opponent who's maining probably both Full Loss and Perulia and Shifter, hits you with one of those cards or multiple of those cards, and you Thrust for D-Barrier, you might be fine. So that's a pretty strong counterplay. But this deck, yeah, so it can get like one summon from the extra deck off of Auxilla and play that way. But sometimes they'll hold the Full Lost because they know that Centurion players now want to go through the Primera Primus line, and that would require at least two summons from the extra deck, this one and Auxilla, even if you stopped early. So, yeah. Okay, now let me talk a little bit about, there are two general ways, in my opinion, that you can divide Centurion builds into. The first is a heavy hand trap version, and the second is a power spell version. Now, the heavy hand trap version, the reason that this is particularly attractive right now is because Atri, which is still a garbage card, is now a very solid, routine, every single game component of your game plan because of Primera Primus. So this elevates a garbage card into an extremely useful, basically mandatory engine requirement, because you will draw on your turn and you will draw on your opponent's turn. Now, if you're drawing on your turn and your opponent's turn, so that's basically like a Heat Soul, and then you have another way to do that, like through Branded Regained, where you can draw on your turn and your opponent's turn, this all of a sudden makes drawing 4-ish, maybe 3, almost always 2 cards, very attractive for hand trap builds, because you're probably going to draw into at least one hand trap, and that's a pretty big deal. So right now, like if you are playing this type of build where you're on Regain, the hand trap build probably makes the most sense. Now, I'm not fully sold on the Byistial version, to be honest. I'll get to that in a moment. But the other thing that you might have noticed is a little bit unusual here is Sengen. So I saw one guy do this. I think his name was, I don't remember. I'll link the YouTube video in the description. He's the first person that I saw doing this. But basically what this does is this is a super relevant extender for the deck. Now, most hands with Centurion will either have one engine piece or one engine piece and an extender. Like, just statistically speaking, those are what your typical hands will look like. One engine piece and no extenders, or an engine piece and one extender. So let's say you normal summon Primera and you have no extender, okay, which is not far off of half of the games that you would be playing, like just based on the math of these cards right here, because you can't normal summon twice. You basically want the Oath and the Stand Up in every single hand, and then one of your normal summons. But anyhow, let's say that you summon Primera and you get Impermed. If you get Impermed on Primera and you don't have Stand Up or Oath, then you may have to pass turn or make some play with the Byistial engine. If you are able to get to Byistial Lubellion, obviously because that's an 8, you can get to Auxilla and continue playing, but you can't rely on that. Especially if something happens like, maybe you have Lubellion and Primera, the Primera gets Impermed and Lubellion gets Ashed. You're probably not synchroing anything there. So the Sengen is a level 8. So let's say you summon normal summon Primera, you get impermed, you have no extender besides Sengen, and then you can summon the Sengen, which is an 8, so now you can go into a 12, Auxilla or Legatia. And also this searches itself. So the reason that I'm not playing the other Millennium cards is because this is the most relevant level that you could be playing from those cards, and also the slightly larger package with the Golem and the Wedju Temple. Those cards are like way worse in terms of the engine. Like, you don't actually want to draw Wedju Temple, because Wedju Temple makes your cards a continuous spell, but your Centurion cards only work if they're traps. So because this searches itself, I feel like you don't have to play the other cards, and this is just like another way to extend through plays. And then because it searches itself, it gives you a free discard off of Centurion. Quick note here, I sometimes notice people saying in comments and videos or in the Discord that, you know, there's a justification for playing a garbage card because, well, at least you can discard it off of stand-up Centurion. But you don't put a card in your deck because it's garbage just because you want to play it, with the explanation being, well, you can always discard it because it's trash. You want stuff to be actually good. So not only is this actually good because it's an 8 and it's an extender that works with like most of the hands you would draw with your engine, and also like could be turned into kind of like a, you could put in like 1 or 2 rank 8s, like Photon Lord for the negate or Zombie Vampire for more extension. But this searches itself, so the free discard off of stand-up is actually free. It's not like a break that you have to play. So in a nutshell, this has good lines around Fulos, good lines around Perulia, it can play under Shifter, it can play under Droll, and so it's well positioned. But the engine still has the inherent problems of playing, for example, really, really bad cards as engine requirements, like Gargoyle and a Wake Up, which are such substantial boosts to the power level or the ceiling of the deck that you have to play them, but these cards are very bad and you don't want to draw them. The Phalanx is a little bit less bad to draw because if you go first, at least it's usable. And the Atri, while it is in a vacuum still a garbage card, it is now absolutely core part of the deck because you enable the draw through the Primera Primus, basically every single turn. So that is the Byistial Centurion version in a nutshell, where the game plan is you're going to be drawing once in your turn with Atri, preferably also once in your turn with Regained, and then your opponent's turn once with Atri and once more with Regained. And that's why having more hand traps is a good thing and better than power spells, because you have all these draws. So it's like having 2 Heat Souls. Let me see, what else is important about this? So, one other thing I wanted to mention is Final Bringer of the End Times. This is a card that maybe doesn't have as much synergy in Centurion, but I think could be really good in like a power spell White Forest build, because this card says, target 1 monster you control and 1 card your opponent controls. That's the activation procedure. Destroy them. Now, because it says them, this card does not check on resolution to see if both cards can still be successfully destroyed. So if you're able to dodge your own destruction, this will still work. So for example, if you were playing a Chenging, which, just as like a quick side note here, if you did want to play a larger Millennium package with the Golem and the Temple, the Golem, which is a 6 and an Earth, which means you can't use it to make Chaos Angel, and you also can't use it for making Dispatter, is basically garbage except for making a generic Synchro 10, and there are very few other generic Synchro 10s that are useful. So, you know, you could make Chenging if you had drawn Final Bringer, and then Chenging can protect itself from Final Bringer, and you still get the banishes. I think it's a little bit too specific to be worth it in this type of deck. But I mean, you also could kind of like do like a cheesy Juris Worm thing where you send your own Juris Worm so you can trigger the Juris Worm, but I think it'll be better in White Forest where you have a lot more control over modulating where your monsters are. Like, you target your own Sylvie on field with the Final Bringer, and then you chain Woes and you synchro away that Sylvie so you don't lose anything, and then this still resolves. Or in like in air quotes, worst case scenario, you tribute your Silvera, goes into the grave, and you pop your opponent's card, and your resource game doesn't really change because it's still in the grave to shuffle back for a Sylvia or Rusia. Anyhow, not to talk about White Forest too much here. So I want to show 2 replays real quick about this. I should also just mention that in a pure-ish version, or Byistial version, there is a little bit of space in the extra deck. And I do think that you must play Masquerade a Little Knight in here because of Regained. Like, you actually have to. I'd say this is mandatory if you're playing Regained. And then you can choose to play either Artemis, which works with the Primera, or what's the salad card called? Salaman. The link. Oh yeah, so the Almiraj. But this only works if it was normal summon. So it's if you normal summon the Trudea specifically. So I feel like this would come up a lot less often than the Artemis, but if you do have space, you can actually play both. So, yeah, this is not a real extra deck, besides just to say that deck lockdown is something that this deck can play around kind of easily, because you're getting draws off of Atri and Regained, and off of Legatia, and this doesn't stop you drawing, it just stops you searching. And you also don't really special summon from the main deck, you put them in the trap zone first, so deck lockdown is a crazy floodgate against basically everyone besides you. Okay, let's go to the gameplay. I haven't had a huge amount of time to play recently, so I only have 2. This is against Snaje Eyes. Okay, so here we draw a normal-ish hand. So we summon the Primera here, and I'm not like currently in danger of Ash, but I do want to check and see if he has it, and so I use the Lubellion just to see. And so here I start to go for the standard line with the Primera Primus, and so here he uses the Fuelos. So the reason that it's useful to save the Fuelos here instead of shotgunning it is I kind of like have to make the Primera Primus first and then Auxilla, because I've made the token a level 4. So he will get 2 draws here. But what I decide to do instead, so I just said I had to do that. I didn't have to do that. What I do instead is I just summon out the Trudea and make the Auxilla so he only gets 1 draw. And then I set the Phalanx and pass turn, knowing that I can make the Primus on their turn. So here he activates Deception, and I don't want to have to play against an Omni. So I'm thinking maybe I should use the Pop of Primera Primus. And so here I don't really have any anything useful to pop on my own side. Like, one trick you can do with Primera Primus is, let's say you had like an Oath set, you could Primera Primus go to destroy your own Oath, and then you could like chain the Oath, and let me double, where's the wording here? You can add an emblem card, blah blah blah, then you can destroy 2 cards, 1 on each field. So because cards don't go to the graveyard until the end of the chain, unless they're sent as part of an effect in the chain, this works. So sometimes you can get like a free send on your field by something that you're training to or whatever, but here I couldn't, and so I just got rid of the field spell because I wasn't gonna be using it again. So now he starts to go for Snaje Eye stuff, and I'm like, okay, my Nib has to be super impactful here, but I also and I do have Oath and stand up in my hand, so I do like have gas technically. Here he goes for the Rabbit because he's trying to force out the Phalanx before he continues his play. And so here he goes to get rid of the Phalanx. And so what I decide to do, maybe this is a little bit greedy, is I banish my own Auxilla because it will be special summon next turn and give me another search. And at this point, I'm thinking, if he played awkwardly to get to this point, there's no way that he's killing me through Nib, right? So I decide to play the greedy way. And also, like, because, so this one, let's double check here. If a face-up Centurion cards you control leaves the field by an opponent's card effects while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this. So because he was popping the Phalanx, I still get to summon this out. This actually doesn't matter, and maybe this is a misplay because I'll just give the Nib token more stats. But anyhow. So now he makes Flows Heaven, and I'm like, okay, I don't want any of the Fiendsmith stuff in rotation. So I decide to drop the Nib here. And I put it in defense, and then I don't know what is going on here, but he now Nibs me. Yeah, and now he brings out Oak and he goes into Flamberge, and he places my Lubellion so that I can't use it again, and then crashes here to bring out the 2 Oaks, and then he passes on a Little Knight, and the Deception resets itself. So here my Auxilla comes back and I get the Search, and I guess he's just chaining Little Knight here because I could just go Battle Phase and attack over it. But what that means is he has no Little Knight now to interact with me here. And I also get to bring out the Primera Primus because the Auxilla left the field because of his card. So, yeah. So here he goes Imperm on the Trudea, and he brings out the Azurune. And I do have a Druis Worm here. I get rid of the Fiendsmith card in rotation. And here, at this point, I'm thinking, like, it's impossible for me to lose. So I just want to use his resources and then just play after that. So here I'm just attacking, and then I make Legatia for a draw. I draw into an Ash, which is pretty good against that deck. His Little Knight comes back, and I'm like, you know, can't really lose at this point. And I'm getting draws 2 off the Atri, going into the Crimson. I Ash, and he scoops there. So then the next game... So here I draw the Retaliating Sea. I forgot to talk about this in terms of like side deck meta cards. So when your opponent activates a spell card that includes an effect that special summons a monster, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. If summoned this way, while this card is face up on the field, any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. So this is a Macrocosmos that is super reliable against any Azamina deck because they're always going to use a spell card that special summons. But I start the turn with Perulia because, you know, this is the one that you often shotgun because you don't want to wait until the normal and then you miss out on a draw. And he ashes the Perulia, so there's the Maxi minigame. And he goes straight for the Deception first. So here, the cool thing about this card is that the incentive with the Azamina cards is almost always to start with the Deception stuff first, and then go into your other engine after. Like, that's the point of the Omni, is to protect your other stuff. And because they do this first, it makes it easier to summon the Retaliating Sea. Obviously, if they knew this was in your hand, they would probably do this differently. And then he immediately scoops. And this shows you, like, there's actually... Sometimes Retaliating Sea actually is just FTK. Okay, so some final thoughts on this deck. I personally do not like the Byistial package in here. And I know that it's good if you're expecting a bunch of Fiendsmith stuff too. And the Fiendsmith Snaje Eye Azamina is one of the more popular decks right now. Yubel, I guess, is still popular. They play Fiendsmith. The Fire King deck, I actually don't know if they play Fiendsmith cards, if they're versions that play Fiendsmith cards. So you could argue that Byistials are a good meta call, and you're just adding a bunch of good meta call stuff into one deck by also playing them. But the reason that I don't like these cards as much in the deck is if you look at the Centurion engine, even if you aren't sure that you will resolve your combo, you can be very sure that you will at least be able to attempt to resolve your combo. Whereas with the Byistial engine, if you don't draw Lubellion, you basically are not playing the Byistial engine, and you're not getting to Regained. There is a way to kind of play around this a little bit with a much larger Byistial engine, where you would also be playing Siren Heirs as another way to get access to the Lubellion in the grave, which, by the way, can tribute the Gargoyle because it is a Dark Dragon that is over level 6, usually. But then I feel like you're really overcommitting to the Byistial stuff. Quick side note, Byistial Alba Loss is not a terrible card. I've never seen anyone play it. This is special summoned from your hand or grave by tributing 2 Byistial monsters. By the way, because you can do this from grave like Lubellion, it means that if you were to discard this off of something like Stand Up, you haven't technically lost a resource. While this card summoned this way is in the monster zone, negate the effects of all face-up Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, XYZ, and Link monsters on the field. And then it says if this face-up card in its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, you can banish all face-down cards in the extra deck face up until your opponent's end phase. So this is a pretty strong floodgate, but it does floodgate you as well. I do think that you actually, unironically, if you're playing a massive Byistial package, you could consider playing this, especially because this is fine if you search this and discard it off of stand-up. You know, you would actually want to do that. It would either be, you know, like that or the Sengen, the extra Sengen that you got after using the first Sengen. So yeah. Also, you must play deck lockdown. This is mandatory in the side deck of Centurion. I think that one of the advantages that Centurion has is that the extra deck space is not super tight, and that's why when people were playing Horus before, you had space for stuff like let me just pull up the Horus cards. So you had space for like the Photon Lord for the negate or the Zombie Vampire for the extension. And that was good, but the problem was the only really good card was Mseti. And then you had to play absolute garbage cards like Happy and King Sarcophagus. And when you're playing a deck that already has very, very bad engine requirements like Gargoyle and Wake Up, and then to a lesser degree the Phalanx and now the Atri, you don't want to add more of these into your deck. When you have like 4 to 5 bricks that are engine requirements, in half of your games, you're going to see at least 1 brick. And then if you get unlucky and you see 2 breaks, then the chance of you being able to actually play through stuff is super low. So that has always been the problem with the Centurion package. Also, this deck doesn't really lose to Ash super hard. And putting in cards like Mseti now give the deck like an Ash magnet. So that being said, you know, maybe you could tinker around with a larger Millennium package or also the horror stuff and play some of the rank 8s. And maybe play like a power spell type version of the deck, and maybe you would play like Final Bring of the End Times in there for sure, Thrust and Talents, and some other like good power spells. So that's something that I am going to test out next, but that's basically all that I wanted to cover for now, and thanks for watching.